Hello there. So welcome to this session. That's AFM. So today I want us to discuss another concept of MM, of dividends irrelevance theory. So this is a continuation of financing decision, the special topics in financing decision, where I want us to discuss on dividend, on MM dividend irrelevance theory. So on a dividend theory, that one we did in your lower levels. That's financial management. We have some various theory of dividend policy, where we have the agency theory, we have the signaling theory, we have the clientele theory, then we also had the MM dividend irrelevance theory. So now this is the most important at your level. So when you talk about the dividend, MM dividend irrelevance theory, now this theory was developed by Modigliani and Miller, who argued that the company dividend policy does not affect the value of the company. Whether the company pays dividend or does not pay dividends, the value of the company does not, the value of the company does not change. So therefore, the payment or non-payment of dividend does not affect the value of the company. Now, according to MM, it was based on the following assumption. Yeah, the assumption of Modigliani and Miller, MM. Number one, it assumes that there is no transaction cost associated with issue of share. In short, there is no what we call the flotation cost. Then number two, also argued that there is no corporate or personal taxes on dividends. Then number three is that the company investment policy is independent of the dividend policy. That means the dividend policy does not affect the investment policy of the company. Then number four, it assumes that the company, the capital market is efficient and perfect. Also number five, it assumes that there is no uncertainty in the market, hence all investors use the same discounting rate. So in short, it assumes that the cost of capital will remain constant regardless of what. Now, based on this, on the above assumption, the dividend irrelevance model can be analyzed as follows. So now this is how you analyze. Now those are the most important. There is some things I have left out on how to derive this formula, of which in this case to you is irrelevant. So what's irrelevant is on it's on how you need to argue your case that the payment and non-payment of dividend is irrelevant. So how do we get PO? Now PO is the current market price per share. You can take D1. D1 is the expected dividend plus P1, that's the expected market price at the end of year one. R is the required rate of return of the cost of capital plus 1. That's how we get PO, the market price per share. Then how do we get MP1? Now, MP1 is the new amount of capital to be raised. Is the amount of new capital to be raised. So in this case, you will take I, where this I means the required investment amount or the capital required to undertake that project, minus X. X is the expected profit at the end of year one. For example, if the company is operating, at the end of year one, how much is your projected profit? The projected profit is X. And then you add ND1. ND1 is the total dividend expected to be paid, where N is the current number of ordinary shares. D1 is expected dividend per share to be paid at the end of the period. Then how do we get M? Now M is the number of new shares to be issued, the total number of new shares. We're saying that N, current number of shares, M is the number of shares to be issued. We have said that MP1 is the total capital to be raised. So in this case, how do you get M, the number of shares to be issued to get that? So you take the total amount of capital required, you divide by the expected market price per share. So once you take the capital required over the market price per share, you're able to determine how many new shares are we going to issue. Then NPO. Now NPO represents the value of the company. And how do we get the value of the company? N is the current number of shares. M is the new number of shares. So you get the total number of shares. Then you multiply by P1, where is the market price per share. If you take the number of shares, you multiply by the market price per share, you get the total value of the equity, minus the amount of capital required, that's I, then you add the retained earnings or the expected profit at the end of year one, and then 1 plus R, where I have explained all the abbreviation. PO, current market price per share, P1, expected market price at the end of year one, D1, the expected dividend at the end of year one, R is the cost of capital or the required rate of return. MP1 is the new capital to be raised. ND1, total dividend at the end of year one, the total dividend. The number of shares, you multiply by D1, the expected dividend per share. I is the required investment amount or the capital required. X is the expected profit at the end of year one. N is the current number of ordinary shares. M, new shares to be issued. And then NPO is the value of the company. So how do we evaluate that? So I want us to do an illustration from our past paper. So open with me November 2019, question 4C. November 2019. And actually this question has become much common. It has been tested for the last 4 consecutive sitting. So November 2019. Question 5B. So now let's go through that. Hoping we are there. And we are told that Tunga Limited has 500,000 ordinary shares. That's N. We have said that N is the current number of ordinary shares. Currently we have 500 ordinary shares trading at 150 per share. PO, the current market price per share, is 150 in the security exchange. Additional information. The dividend payable in 1 year period is 3 shillings per share. So D1, the expected dividend is 3 shillings per share. Then number 2, an investment opportunity worth 25 million. Now we have said that I is the required investment amount. So we already given I. And you are told that, number 2, an investment opportunity worth 25 million. So I is 25 million, is to be undertaken. The profit to be earned is 15 million. So that's X. We have said that X is expected profit at the end of year 1. If you undertake this project, we expect the profit to be 15 million. The cost of capital for the company is 10%. That's R. We say that R is the cost of capital, the required rate of return, of which you are given is 10% required. Using MM approach, that's Morgan and Miller approach, show that the payment of dividend does not affect the value of the firm. So what does that mean? You need to prove that the value of the company when there is no payment, when there is no dividend payment, and the value of the company when you pay the dividend are the same. So that's what we need to prove. So how do we solve that? So first of all, we need to determine how much is the current value of the company. We want to determine the current value of the company, the current value of the firm. Currently, the firm has 500 ordinary shares, each at a market price of 150. So that means the current value of the company currently is 75 million. So we want to show that if you pay dividend, you don't pay the dividend, the value of the company will still still will be 75 million. So now let's start with the first theory. If there is no payment of dividend, there is no payment of dividend. If there is no payment of dividend, we want now to determine the value of the firm. And the value of the firm, we need to come up to NPO. So this is the process you follow. Let's start with the first one. That PO, we say that PO is equals to D1 plus P1, you divide by R plus 1. PO, you already have the current market price per share. PO, it's 150, is equals to D1 is expected dividend, of which we have the D1 here, which is 3. But in this case, if there is no payment of dividend, that means D1 will be 0. You see, in this case, there is no payment of dividend. So therefore, the expected dividend will be 0 plus P1. Now, that's what we need to determine. P1 is expected market price per share at the end of that period. Then we divide by 1 plus R, or R plus 1. So 1 plus R, let's just put it the easier way. 1 plus R. So it's 1 plus R. R, the cost of capital is 10%, 0.1. So now with that, we need to determine P1. So how do we get that? You just cross multiply, where P1 is equals to 1 plus 0.1 is 1.1. Then you take 1.1 times 150. So 150 times 1.1, and you get that your P1 is equivalent to 165. So we already have P1, the expected market price at the end of the first period. Now let's determine MP1. How much do we require the amount of new capital to be raised? MP1, we said is to take the investment amount required minus the expected retained earnings plus ND1, which will be the investment amount required, we have is 25 million minus X is expected profit. We expect a profit of 15 million plus ND1. N is the existing number of shares, of which we have 500,000, 0.5. D1, we said that D1 is the dividend per share, but in this case we are saying there is no payment of dividend. So therefore, dividend will be 0. So that means how much do we require? So 25 minus 15 plus 0, it will get an amount of 10 million. Get an amount of 10 million. So 10 million is the required amount. So if this is the required amount, we need to get M. How many shares will we have to issue? M, you say that you take MP1, you divide by P1. We need 10 million. That's the capital required. You divide by P1. And P1, the expected market price per share at the end of the period will be 165. So that means for us to raise 10 million, how many shares will we have to issue? How many shares will we have to issue? You get an amount of 606 share. So we already have M. Now with M, now let's get the value of the company. NPO. NPO, we have said that you take market price per share, N plus M, then you minus the investment amount required, plus X, then all of it you divide by 1 plus R, of which it will be P1, the expected market price per share, it's 165. N, how many shares do we have now? The current number of shares, here N, we have 500,000 plus N. M is a new shares to be issued. We'll have to issue an additional 606 shares. Then you minus I is the investment amount required. And investment amount required is 25 million. So 25 million. Then you add X. X is expected profit, and the expected profit here we expect 15 million. All of it you divide by 1 plus R. R is 0.1. So how much would be NPU? So can you compute that? Now you apply board mass. You take 500,000, you add 6606, so you get the total number of shares. Once you get the total number of shares, you multiply by the market price per share, so that you get the total value of the equity. You take the number of shares, you multiply by the market price per share. Now once you get the total value of the equity, you can add 15, the retained earnings, the expected profit, then you minus the capital, that's the present value of cash outflow, the amount required to undertake that project. Then you divide by 1.1. And how much do you get? So once you do that, NPO will still be 75 million. NPO will be that. So that's when there is no payment of dividend. If we pay the dividend, will the value of the company change? So now we look at if dividend is paid. Now, if dividend is paid, you just repeat what you have done. You just duplicate what you have done. You start with PO. We have said that PO is equals to D1 plus P1, 1 plus R. PO, the current market price per share is 150, is equals to. Now, in this case, there is payment of dividend. So D1, you already had the D1. The expected dividend to be paid at the end of period 1 will be 3 now, plus P1. Now, P1 is what now we expect, the price at the end of period 1. 1 plus R. R is 10%, 0.1. So it will be, you cross multiply, 3 plus P1, 150 times 1.1. So that's 10%. That will be 165. So how do we get P1? Therefore, to get P1, so take this to the other side, becomes minus 165 minus 3, and it will get 162. So the expected market price at the end of the period 1, if there is payment of dividend, will be 162. Now, with PO, now let's determine the amount of new capital required. And P1, we say that you take the investment required, then you minus the expected profit plus ND1. So it will be investment amount required it will be an amount of 25 million minus the expected profit, we expect 15, plus now ND1. ND1, the current number of shares we have is 500,000, that's 0.5 million shares. D1, the expected dividend at the end, if the dividend is paid, the expected dividend per share will be 3. So therefore, how much do we need to raise now? So MP1 will be an amount of 11.5 million. That's the new capital we need to raise. Once we get MP1, now we can determine, for it to raise this capital, how many shares will we have to issue? So we determine M, and we said M, you take MP1, you divide by P1. The expected capital is 11,500,000. You divide by P1. The expected market price at the end of year 1, when the dividend is paid, it's 162. So that means how many shares will we have to issue? We have to issue 988 shares. New shares. So now with that, we can get the value of the company, NPO. NPO, you take P1, the expected price per share is 162, and the current number of shares we have is 500,000, plus you add M. M is the new shares to be issued. New shares to be issued, we have to issue 988 shares. Then you minus the investment required. We require an amount of 25 million plus X. X is expected profit. We expect a profit of 15 million. Then all of it you divide by 1 plus R. 1 plus 0.1. And how much will you get? So you apply board mass, 500,000. You add 7988 to get the total number of shares. You multiply by the market price per share to get the value of the equity. You minus the capital required. Then you add the expected profit. Then you divide by 1.1. And if you do that, your NPO will still be 75 million. You are trying to prove that whenever there is payment of dividend or non-payment of dividend does not affect the value of the company. The current value of the or the firm is 500 times 150 to an amount of 75. If there is no payment of dividend, still our NPO we got 75 million. With the payment of dividend, we still have 75 million. That's how you prove that the payment of dividend is irrelevant. The payment of dividend is irrelevant. So I want us to try another illustration. May 2019, question 2C. May 2019, question 2C. So hoping we are there. Part C of the question we are told that Umoja group of companies belong to a risk class of which the appropriate capitalization rate is 10%. Capitalization rate that is the same as cost of capital. R is 10%. The company current has in issue 200 ordinary shares selling at 50 shillings. And the current number of shares, currently the company has 200,000 shares, each selling at 50. So PO, the current market price per share is 50 shillings. The company is contemplating the declaration of dividend at the rate of 3 per share at the end of the current financial year, which has just begun. So D1, the expected dividend per share, we expect to pay an amount of 3 shillings. Then we are told that using Modigliani and Miller proposition on dividend irrelevance, determine. So number 1 is the price of the ordinary share at the end of the year, assuming a dividend is not declared. And number 2, the price of the ordinary share at the end of the year, assuming a dividend is declared. Then number 3, assuming that the company generates a net income of 2 million. Company generate an income. Now that's what we call the expected profit is 2 million. Generate a profit of 2 million and makes you investment of 4 million. Investment amount required, it's 4 million. During the period. Show that under the Modigliani and Miller assumption, payment or non-payment of dividend has no effect on the company value. So how do you show that? How do you show that? So now let's start with the first one. Now the first one, or number 1, is the price of the ordinary share at the end of year, assuming the dividend is not declared. So number 1, we say that how do we get PO? PO is D1 plus P1, 1 plus R. If dividend is not declared, PO, we know it's 50, is equals to D1. If dividend is not declared, that means the dividend per share will be 0. Then we need to determine P1, 1 plus R. Our R is 10%, 0.1. So it will be, it's 50 times 1.1 is equals to P1. And therefore, P1 it will be an amount of 55. P1 will be an amount of 55. Number 2, you have to determine the price of ordinary share at the end of the year, assuming the dividend is paid. Now, if dividend is paid, now we want to determine how much will be the market price per share. So we are still using the same thing, that PO is equals to D1 plus P1, 1 plus R. PO, you already have it's 50. D1, if we pay dividend, the expected dividend will be 3, that's D1, plus P1, now that's what we are determining, 1 plus R. Now the cost of capital is 10%, so it will be 0.1. So it will be 50 times 1.1, that's 55, so it's 55 is equals to 3 plus P1. So how do we get P1? To get P1, you take this 3 to the other side, so it will be 55 minus 3, of which you get an amount of 52. If no dividend is paid, the market price is expected is 55. If we pay dividend, the market price will reduce an amount of 52. And then number 3, we are told that assuming that the company generates a net income of 2 million and makes new investment of 4 million during the period, show that under Modigliani and Miller assumption, payment or non-payment of dividend has no effect to the company value. That the payment of dividend has no effect on the value of the company. So we want to prove that dividend irrelevance. So first of all, I need to determine how much is the value of the company. The value of the firm currently we are told that the firm has 200 ordinary shares, each trading at 50 shillings. So that means the current market value of the company will be an amount of 10 million. Now we want to show that the payment or non-payment does not affect the value of the company. Now, if no dividend is paid, so we have already computed the PO, the expected market price per share. So the next step, now, if we just go through what we did here, PO, we have already, P1 we have already computed. So once you determine P1, the next step you need to determine is MP1. MP1 is a new amount of capital to be raised. It's I minus X plus MD1. I is the investment opportunity, of which will be 4 million minus X. Our X, the expected profit, will be 2 million plus ND1. and the current number of shares we have is 0.2 million shares, and D1, if there is no payment of dividend, dividend will be 0. So that means the amount of new capital to be raised, it's 4 minus 2, which is 2 million. Once you determine MP1, the next step you need to determine M. Is the number of new shares to be issued for us to raise the 2 million. So you take MP1, you divide by P1. MP1 we need is 2 million, and expected market price per share, if there is no payment of dividend, the P1 we had forecasted was 55. There's no payment of dividend, the market price per share was 55. So that means how many shares will we have to issue? We'll issue an amount of 36,364 shares. Now with M, now we can get the value of the company, NPO. NPO, you take P1, current number of shares, new shares to be issued, then you minus the investment, add X, 1 plus R. P1, the expected market price per share when there is no payment of dividend will be 55. And the current number of shares we have is 200,000 plus M. M is the new shares to be issued, of which we have it 36,364 shares. Then what you get, you minus I is an investment opportunity. Investment opportunity was 4 million plus X. X, the expected profit we have is 2 million. All of it, you divide by 1 plus R. R was 0.1. So how much will be that? And then remember when computing, you see this is 4 million. Once you take 200 plus 36, 346, you multiply by 55, you get the figures. Then you minus, this is 4 million. Don't just minus 4 plus 2, no. You minus 4 million plus 2 million. If you do that, you get that the value of the firm will be 10 million. 10 million. That's when there is no payment of dividend. Now, if dividend is paid, how much would be the value of the company? So the value of the company will be, we already have the P1. If the dividend is paid, we have already computed P1, the expected market price will be 52. So what we need is MP1. They say that MP1 is a new amount raised. You take I, the investment opportunity is 4 million minus X. X is expected profit. The expected profit is 2 million plus now ND1. N is the current number of shares. We have 200,000 shares. And then the expected dividend, D1, we expect to pay a dividend of 3 shillings per share. So that means how much will we have to raise? How much amount will we have to raise? So in this case, MP1 will be 2.6 million. We need to raise 2.6 million. Then we get M. M is the new shares to be issued. You take MP1, you divide by P1. We need to raise an amount of 2.6 million. And the expected market price per share at that time, if the dividend is paid, the P1 is an amount, will be an amount of 52. If we need to raise 2.6 and the market price per share will be 52, so how many shares will we have to issue? How many shares will we have to issue? That means we'll issue an amount of 50,000 shares. We'll issue an amount of 50,000 shares. Then lastly, now let's get the value of the company, NPO. NPO says you take P1, the expected market price per share, if the dividend is paid, we have it's 52, so it will be 52. And the current number of shares we have is 200,000. Then you add M. M is the new shares to be issued, which is 50,000. Then you minus I, that's the investment. The investment amount required is 4 million. And then you add X is the expected profit. And the expected profit will be 2 million. All this you divide by 1 plus R. So 1 plus R, R was 10%, so 0.1. If you do that, what do you get? So you take 250 shares, and the market price is 52, you get the value of the equity. You raise the capital required, Then you add the retained earning of the expected profit. Then you divide by 1.1, and you'll still get an amount assignment. So you can go and try this question, December 2021, December 2021, question 1A and B. Part A required the assumption of MM, then number B you had to prove. Those are a total of 14 marks. So and that marks the end of that session. Thank you for your time.